Hi, my name is Barb Sackel. Today's video is made possible by QuiltWoman.com. In today's video, we're going to talk about cutting borders and adding borders onto your quilt. Sometimes you would find the instructions would say for this side it's so long and for this side it's so long, and it's really hard to measure out 65.5 or 98.5. So I'm going to show you a little bit of a shortcut so that you don't necessarily have to measure out those long pieces. The quilt we're using today is behind me. It's called Lilac Festival by EBI Fabrics, and we're going to do many things to this quilt. In this video we're going to add a teal border on the outside. Then we're going to do some crazy grid quilting. That'll be in the next video. And I'm also going to show you how to put together a backing with this quilt, and that'll be in the next video too. So watch for those videos coming up using this quilt. So right now we're going to put our fabrics together, and I'm going to take my one piece of fabric, I'm going to put the two ends together, line up the edge, and I'm going to cut out my strips 4 layers deep. Let's go and get some cutting done. Okay, so here's our fabric down on our mat. I have it folded over on itself so that I can cut out 2 strips at a time. My edge is lined up with the edge of the mat, and now I'm going to take my first cut and throw it away because we want a nice line. Measure in 3.5 inches. That's what my directions tell me, and my directions say I need 7 strips. So there's 2. There's 4. There's 6. And one more. I'm going to go into the single because I don't need a double. I don't need 8. I only need 7. And there is a video I just made talking about cutting layers. So if this is a little bit unusual for you to see me cut these layers so quickly, go ahead and check out that video. And just like that, I have my 7 strips done. Well, I think that was less than a minute. We're ready to put these together and start our border treatment. Okay, so here we are at the sewing machine, and I have my strips in front of me, but I need to join them because one strip is not going to be long enough. My painter told me I need 65.5 inches, and I know this strip is only 40, so I'm going to join 2 of them. So I'm going to lay my first strip down across and on the right side, and I'm going to lay my second strip on top like that, right sides together, so that it forms a corner unit. Then I'm going to take the head, I call this the head and I call this the tail, and the head is right in that corner where the 2 strips join, and the tail is right in that corner where the 2 strips meet right there again. Now, like in Let's Square in the Corner video, I taught you how to draw that line on your machine, and I took a ruler and just basically laid it on my sewing machine where the needle goes, and I just took a marker and I drew a line for me. I also use that line in this this technique when I join the strips to make the border treatments. So I'm going to put the head in the presser foot right under the needle, and I'm going to take the tail and I am going to just drag this right up the line. Now, another thing that you could do, you could draw a line, of course, from head to tail, but that's a lot of extra work. So if you don't mind having a line on your sewing machine, or a piece of masking tape on your sewing machine works just as well, just take that tail and just drive it right up that line. Done. Now I'm going to take the strip that I just finished, and I'm going to lay it out across my table just like I did the first one. I'm going to take the 3rd strip, the new one. I'm going to put it like that upside down L, and again I'm going to turn it, put the head, what I call the head, underneath the needle, and the tail I'm going to drive right up the line. And as you can see, I'm chain piecing these units. And you can just go on and on with this and make as long of a border treatment as necessary. Of course, you would do the same thing making your binding. And I'm going to do one more piece because I want this long enough to do two sides at once. So again, I'm going to take that, put my tail right on that line. Up I go. That's it. Now I'm going to cut off 1/4 inch right along the sewn line. Get rid of that. And let's get rid of this piece. And finally, I'm going to cut this last excess off. And now we have a very long border ready to go. And like I said before, I'm not going to measure this. Okay, now let's take it over to the quilt and let the quilt do the measuring for us. Okay, so here's our long strip. I took it to the iron and I ironed out the center crease and I ironed the seam here that we put together so that this unit is nice and flat. Now I'm going to put it on itself, and it doesn't matter which right sides, it doesn't matter, just put it on itself. And what we're going to do is we're going to measure this across the quilt, and this is the center of the quilt. Now, like when we put a block together, we sang the song top, bottom, side, side. Well, here's where it really applies. When I do borders, it goes like this. Top, bottom, side, side. Top, bottom, side, side. And that way, because you're singing this song to yourself, no matter how many borders you put on, it's consistent. So, because the top and the bottom are the shorter edges, we need to measure our piece along our quilt in the center to find out how big the top and bottom need to be. Now, this is a correction way to fix your quilt, because when you build your quilt, if you just put your borders on, your borders, without measuring or without doing this trick, your borders will start to wave. And the more borders you add, the more wavy quilt you'll have. And then when you go to quilt it, you'll actually have to stitch darts in it to bring the sides in. So this is a correction. Regardless of how well you sew your quilt, this is going to correct any imperfections and make it so that your edges aren't wavy. So I laid these two pieces out across the middle of my quilt and from side to side, and I smooth it out. Now this is the reason we don't have to measure, because once I cut this, this is what we're going to be our the quilt will have to match this size, and I'll show you what I mean. So now that it's laid out, I'm going to take my scissors and I'm just going to cut along the edge, and then I'm going to go over to this side, cut along the edge, and there it is. My top and my bottom have been measured out. Now I'm going to bring my top and my bottom, and this is always a surprise whether it's going to work or not. And you'll see what I mean by if your quilt needs correcting. I'm going to bring my top down on the table, take my cut piece, and I'm going to lay it out. And if it matches, then you've done a pretty good job. And if it doesn't matches, we're going to use that trick bubble on the bottom. And that's going to gather any excess fabric you have in your quilt top. So lay your border on the top of your quilt, and you have to pin this. And the reason why you have to pin this is because if there is an imperfection in your quilt top, you need it pinned so that your quilt on the machine will gather your quilt on the bottom, and you'll never know it's happening. You'll never see it. So I pin about every 8 or 9 inches, and that gives me plenty of room. And now I put a couple pins in there, and then I'm going to go to the other end and pin this. And this is fitting pretty darn good. And again, I'm going to add a couple more pins in place. match that up to the sides. Now I'm going to do the other side. Bring that down. And this is again our top bottom portion of the song. This is right sides together. And let's pin. Now I've already put the first layer onto the quilt. This technically is the second layer. Sometimes I have multiple layers. I like the way borders frame out a quilt. It's like a picture framing out a painting. So I tend to like my borders. And again, I pinned both ends, and then I would, if my quilt was a little extra big, I would kind of manipulate it so that they were evenly pieced, and then as your presser foot feeds on this, it would eat up that bubble on the bottom and gather your quilt. And so this is the way to square up your quilt as you're going along. And notice there was not one bit of measuring. Now we need to take this to the sewing machine, sew our 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then we're going to come back and do the sides. Okay, so I have sewn my top and my bottom on, and I've pressed it open. Now we have just the sides left to do. So I have put my quilt out on the table, and you can put it out on the floor if you don't have the table space. And this, I have put my 2 pieces of border treatment on top and smoothed everything out. And once that's done, I'm going to go and cut the sides. And again, that's my measurement. Quilt has done the measuring for me. Now I'm going to slide this over so that I can pin these in place. You're going to lay this down. And it fits perfect. We're going to pin this side in place. We're going to pin the other side in place. Sew it, your 1/4 inch seam, and iron it, and your quilt top is done and ready to be quilted. So join me again on the next video as we learn how to do a backing for this quilt. See you then.